This is the Crappie Connection, brought to you by Redneck Rubber, Power Crappie, Visit Ridgeland, B&M Poles, K9 Fishing, Cornfield Fishing Gear, Bobby Garland Baits, Genco Fishing, Denali Rods, The Direction TV, Top Hat Jigs, Crappie Magnet, Anderson Minnow Farm,
Hook and Bullet Purpose-Built Optics.
We're going to go ahead and get started. My name is Todd and Brad. I guide full-time down on Lake Eufaula, and they kind of gave me a topic of all things crappie, like a Q&A deal. And so if anybody's got any questions, feel free. You know, a lot of y'all that come to these shows, y'all have heard me speak multiple times. I got my buddy Brad Chappell. Brad is from Ross Burnett, Mississippi, okay? And I brought him up here because I got thinking, there's a lot of people in Oklahoma who fish for crappie the way that I've always done it. You know, we go out and we jig brush piles, and, you know, now with your forward-facing sonar, everybody's kind of into that. But I want to give Brad a second to explain what he does and has been doing for over 20 years, guiding down there, and it works here. I remember a few years ago, before I even really knew you, you came up here to Eufaula.
Right.
And so I'm going to turn it over to him for a little bit and let him talk about a technique that is very underutilized in Oklahoma. And it's to me, it's like the laziest great way to catch crappie.
I love it. A couple of years ago, kick it off, full-time guide, Brad Chappell out of Mississippi. Been guiding for 10 plus years. Started out fishing tournaments, crappie masters, and some different leagues. Did real well with that through the years, and was sponsored by Bobby Garland Baits, Oklahoma-based company. Been with them 10 plus years as far as designing colors and different things. Grenada Gold's like one of my babies. I don't know if you've ever seen that color itself. Vegas is another color that I really come up with. But my technique that I go into is a technique called long line trolling, and it's where I'm fishing out the back of the boat. I use 8 poles at a time, and literally I can take any person that can hold a fishing pole and reel in, from the very young to the young at heart, and we can catch fish. The guy driving the boat is really dictating how fast the jigs are being pulled, what depth they're in, and it really works. Bobby Garland asked us a couple years ago to come out here and show everybody that it'll work on these lakes. So we brought a boat over. Everybody thought we were really crazy because we had a lot of fishing poles. And they took us to Ulaga, which I couldn't even pronounce it at the time. But we went to Ulaga in the middle of summertime, and it was really tough fishing at the beginning of it because we had to find the fish. But the more I kind of went out in that lake, I noticed that wasn't nobody else fishing out in the middle of the lake. A lot of those fish, and I told them at the end at Bass Pro Shops that night, was I think a lot of y'all's fish die of old age. Wasn't nobody out there catching them. And this technique's really dangerous for the crappie whenever they suspend. So right now I know at Grand Lake they're saying that these fish are suspended out in front of the river channel, just sitting there, which live scopers are getting them. But before live scope was a thing, these fish were just sitting there waiting to be caught, really. But to kind of give you a gist of the technique itself is I'll tie 2 jigs onto one line, and could range from a 32nd ounce, which is a really, really light jig that's going to go really high in the water column, all the way to 1/4 ounce jig heads that's going to go deeper in the water column. and I'll troll them at a consistent speed. 1.2, and I'll try not to get really too technical, but my favorite speed is 1.2, which is really fast. And what it does is kind of like if you have a Labrador retriever at the tank here, and he throws something out, that natural instinct for that dog is to go retrieve that bait or that duck. Same thing when these baits come by these fish, their natural instinct is to attack. So I kind of export that in this technique to catch them. So as these baits are coming over the top of their heads, their natural instinct is just to smack it, to grab it. And not every fish is going to do it at one time, but as these baits are being trolled, you're going to catch the active fish out of these schools. So I'll make a pass, might go a mile and a half down a creek channel. Well, as I'm going through there might be thousands of fish through that area, but I'm going to pick out the active fish non-stop. And you think, well, you got 8 poles out. Do you ever catch 8 fish at one time? And I have, actually. Now, that was an unbelievable day, and we had them really keyed in, but this technique really goes after the active fish in a body of water. Another thing it lets me do is learn a body of water. Just like I was telling you about Oolaga, all I had was a map of the lake on my units. Well, other than that, I had no idea about this lake. So the first thing I do is throw out my baits, look at the creek channels, and go along through there. Well, as I'm trolling, I started picking up waypoints. And what I mean by waypoints was different stumps and brush piles. And by the end of the day, I probably had 25 or 30 brush piles marked that normally would have took somebody 10, 15 trips to find. Well, me moving at that consistent speed at 1.2, I was actually able to find them really quick. So you think 1.2 at 8 hours a day fishing, I'm covering 8 to 10 miles of lake. So you can cover a lot of water really quick. Now, that's if I'm just wanting to learn a body of water. But if I'm wanting to really fine tune an area, I'll go down and make a wide path and come back around and hit them again. And we've also got some videos of me actually on the water doing this to kind of make it look a little bit more sense if you're really wanting to dig into this technique. Anybody got any questions about this so far? Yeah? You ready to do it?
So everybody in here seen spider rigging, where your rods are in the front of the boat and you're kind of pushing baits. The way he's doing it is he's pulling them way behind the boat. So it's kind of, a lot of us that grew up fishing grew up trolling. We didn't know any better. One rod might have jigs on it, the other rod might have a crankbait on it. A lot of us ended up trolling. And it's kind of one of those, I think it's slowly disappearing. And it's now, since there's less and less people doing it, it's probably one of the most deadly techniques there is, because like he said, there's a lot of fish that are not getting targeted this way. Brad and I interviewed a fish biologist day before yesterday, Josh Johnson, one of the most intelligent guys I've ever heard speak.
Yeah.
And he talked about some of the lakes here, and that episode will be on Crappie Connection, a podcast, and you really need to watch it. I'm not going to tell you everything he said, but talking about Grand Lake. How many of y'all here fish Grand Lake? All right, good number. He said that there are more 10 to 13 inch fish right now in Grand Lake than there's ever been in the history of this lake. I don't remember the exact number, but I'm pretty sure it was a made-up word. You've got million, billion, trillion. He said that the amount of mature crappie in Grand Lake right now is, I don't even know how to explain to y'all how many he's saying there is, okay? They are thick as could be. But the reason why people are not catching them is because they're still fishing their dock. They're still fishing that brush pile. These fish are out in open water, suspended.
He was saying there were acres of schools of fish suspended.
He said that some of these schools of fish are over 5 acres big. 5 acres out in the... And trust me, they're catching them. I know some guys that are absolutely wearing them out. What depth?
He said someone has 6 foot in the water.
Yeah.
They were really high.
But, you know, that's going to depend on conditions. Obviously, if it's real windy, that day they're not going to be up 6 feet. They're going to be down a little bit. But this technique, and the reason why I asked Brad to come up here is because, in my mind, anybody who fishes Grand Lake, this is how you need to go about catching. And you cover a lot of water, like he said. You know, get you some poles, get you some baits. Even if you don't have rod holders, you can do this technique holding these rods. Get out there and troll and cover some water and find these schools of fish, because this isn't my opinion, this is what even he was saying. There will probably be 99% of that year class of fish that are now mature that will die of old age before they get caught. There's that many of them out there. So, you know, get out there and try this long line. Now, of course, some of y'all that are ate up with live scope, y'all are going to want to get out there and try to pick them off one at a time, live scoping. And that's great.
Yeah.
But, you know, every time I see one of his videos of how he's guiding, I'm envious, because he's under an umbrella sitting on his rear trolling, you know, catching fish. And I'm like, dang, man, I'm up here standing up all day, working hard at it. So
my boat does all the work. You know, one of the things on your boat that you definitely would need would be an auto steer trolling motor. And if you've got a Corolla, Ultrex, a Garmin, any of these newer trolling motors have this function, and you can dial in that speed. And, you know, you can make it as technical as you want, or you can make it as simple as you want. And just like that, tie on a 1/16 ounce jig head and toss it out of the back of your boat. And you're thinking, well, how do I know how deep that jig's going to go? The easiest way to explain that is keep going shallow until you start seeing that pole start bending back and dragging along the bottom. Well, you know, if it starts dragging at 6 foot, and all of a sudden it wasn't dragging at 7, that light bulb should go off and say, all right, that jig's going about 6.5, 7 foot deep. You know, it's going a little bit deeper than that 6 foot. So it's really easy to figure it out if you take your time. Throw out some jigs and go out there. Well, if we see these fish suspended at 6 foot deep, and the last time I was out, or that day I'm out, and I notice those jigs are digging dirt at 6 foot, well, I'm going to tie on that same setup, go out there where I see these big schools of fish suspended, and catch them. And live scope, like we said, we talk about them all the time on our show, but live scope's a great technique to really pick out and tournament fish and all that, and it's phenomenal. But I can't take anybody out there and do a live scoping trip. It takes a lot of time to really fine-tune what you're doing when it comes to live scope. This technique, I can take literally anybody, no matter what their skill set is, and they can catch fish and feel like a hero. My best customer that comes down multiple times a year, and this is all he wants to do, is Hank Williams Jr. I mean, everybody knows Hank. This is Hank's favorite way to crappie fish, because it's easy, it's not a lot of skill set, you can relax, and you can catch fish. And that's really what in my mindset is, what do you want to do when you go fishing? Have fun. This is a fun way to take anybody and get out there and catch fish. All you need is, like I said, a couple fishing poles, and you know, we can go through brands, and you know, certain poles will help you out, but any pole will work as long as it has a spinner reel. I use spinner reels. I use 6-pound tests to kind of help you out on that side of things. Some days I might use rod runners. Some days I might use ball heads. I let the fish kind of tell me. Colors, there's so many colors out there, from beaver bottom to you name it. Everybody's got all these different colors. Throw out a couple different colors. You start getting bite on black and chartreuse, well, change them all over to black and chartreuse. You start catching them on that single 1/16, we'll change all your poles over to 1/16. Go back to that same stretch where you just caught 2, and then all of a sudden you're going to catch 8 every time you go through there. But it's a really cool technique that will work in Oklahoma.
You know, another to kind of expand on this, I think another lost technique that used to be deadly because everybody was doing it, and now is still deadly, but nobody's doing it, is trolling crankbaits. Guys, do not overlook trolling crankbaits. The same way he's trolling jigs. Now, if you're going to troll crankbaits, you do need a couple rod holders. But, you know, I hear all the time, and it's pretty unfortunate because of me and what I do, and Brad and what he does, and all these other crappie pros that are here. Somebody will come up and they say, hey, I want you to explain to me how to catch crappie. Okay, well, what kind of boat do you have? Oh, I got a pontoon boat. And I've heard this come out of so many people's mouths, and it really upsets me. They're like, oh, dude, you can't do it out of a pontoon boat. Yeah, you can. Absolutely you can. You can't fish out of a pontoon boat the technique that I fish at Lake Eufaula, but that doesn't mean that you can't go out there and pull crankbaits or pull jigs.
Yeah.
Because I guarantee you right now on Grand Lake, you can go out there and catch limit after limit after limit of crappie, pulling crankbaits or pulling jigs, and it's the same deal. Get you some rods, get you some, you know, at the very end of this building, there's Lucky Strikes down there. They got hundreds of crankbaits down there for like $3.50 or $4 or something. I think that's what I saw. Buy you some crankbaits, throw them out, start pulling them. Okay, cover some water, and you may go from here to Wolf Creek without getting bit, and then all of a sudden you'll start catching some fish, and you're like, oh, okay, I'm in one of these schools now. Of course, it would be easier if you had the good electronics that we have to go and find these schools of fish before you start pulling to them. But I think we've started to make crappie fishing a lot more complicated than what it is. I mean, these fish did not change in the last 5 years with the invention of live scope. We've just changed how we've always caught them. And, you know, me and Brad were talking a couple weeks ago when we were at a different show, how awesome it was that the very first big tournament this year was won by two guys in a John boat that didn't have electronics. Okay, they outfished 80-something teams that, and when I say these 80 teams probably average at least 20,000 in electronics, I'm being conservative.
Absolutely.
Because I know that I've got that much in my electronics. And some of these guys have way bigger screens and way more of this stuff. And these two guys won the very first tournament of the year, 2 days, in a 13-foot aluminum John boat with a scull and paddle, with cane poles. They had no clue what the jig they were using was even called. They said it was the first time they had ever gone fishing without beer in the boat. Okay, and they won that tournament because...
My new heroes.
Yeah. They won that tournament because they went fishing. Everybody else, and I talked to a lot of teams after that first day before they had secured it, and a lot of those teams were like, dude, those guys had to have been cheating because there wasn't fish in those lily pads. And I'm like, well, how do you know? Well, we went up there with our electronics and we looked. Well, I'll just tell you right now, that's an idiotic statement because you can't see fish in lily pads with electronics, even with live scope. You can't. You have to actually fish. You know, we talked about it. I think you're getting ready to see it go in the reverse of what we've seen in the last 3 years. In the last 3 years, every single tournament up until that one had been won pretty much by one guy fishing live scoping. And now, like what Brad was saying and like what this biologist is saying, man, there's a lot of untouched fish now out in open water that these trollers can catch. Spider rigging, long lining, trolling crankbaits. So kind of every once in a while, go back to the basics. Just go fishing. You know, Fort Gibson's a perfect example. At Fort Gibson, up in the river, which fishes just like Grand, a lot of times those fish will get so tight on the structure that you cannot see them with electronics. You cannot. you drop a jig down and you can watch it on your electronics, and the jig goes down to that structure, and then all of a sudden a fish appears because they're that tight into cover. So sometimes, even on Eufaula, and I keep saying Fort Gibson last fall absolutely was hilarious, because these guys were coming up there in the river where I was fishing, and they would drop the trolling motor and they would look at a lay down or whatever it may be, brush pile, and they'd be like, nope, because they didn't see separation of fish and brush. They'd pull the trolling motor and idle up to the next spot. And I would go right, as I worked my way through, I would end up on that spot, and my clients would be looking at the screen, they're like, man, I don't see one. And I'm like, I know, but just go ahead and put a jig down there. And all of a sudden, here comes this fish up out of there. Okay, so even with all this technology, you still have to fish. And long line and trolling crankbaits, I think it's getting ready to come back.
Yeah, I hope so. And actually, I have fished Grand Lake. I thought about that a minute ago. I did fish Grand about 8 years ago on a rider's thing for Bobby Garland, and I do recall how these fish will suspend out, and we did catch them here. So I know for a fact you can't catch them on Grand because I've done it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Your long line comes back your boat to the line now, we have no.
Yep.
How can I control that boat steer and teach you what's coming back here?
You said Ultrex? You've got a heading.
Okay.
Ultrex?
Yeah, I don't have an iPhone.
You probably need an iPilot.
Hey,
Well, as long is it remote control still? Well, that's fine as well. You're just going to set that one direction as you're going.
what was his question?
Okay.
Because everybody else couldn't hear that.
His question was, could he use a non-auto steer trolling motor?
No, I have, yeah, correct.
A non-auto steer trolling motor to long line? And the answer is yes, still on that. A foot control is the only one that, I mean, actually when I started long lining, we were using foot control. Now somebody would have to sit up front and do it at that point. And you can do it. So I have done it that way. But to make it easier, any kind of trolling motor that has a fixture that can keep it at a consistent heading, direction, and a speed setting is fine.
So you can do that same thing, a push tractor with a jig, right? Spider rig.
Spider rigging, the kind of question there was, what's the difference between spider rigging and long liner?
No, I mean, you could do basically the same thing, right?
It's similar, but one of the main differences between spider rigging and long lining is spider rigging, you're fishing off the front of the boat. You're typically going slower. A typical speed spider rig is about 0.2 to about 0.6. This technique, you're so far behind the boat, you're going basically double the speed as you would spider rigging. Because if you speed up spider rigging, your baits go up underneath your trolling motor, and up underneath your boat, and you spook fish. This technique is, your baits are going to be, I'd say 70 to about 120 feet behind the boat.
And so you can cover a lot more water.
A lot faster.
Your speed's 2 to 3 times what you would be if you were spider rigging. And so by long lining jigs or pulling crankbaits, you can cover a lot more water, and it's going to really help you find these big schools of fish up here. I mean, I know the limit up here is not that many, it's only 15, but everybody here that's fished Grand for much time at all knows that even as early back as 5 or 6 years ago, everybody at Grand Lake was saying, oh God, our lake's dead, there's no crappie, you know, everybody was really concerned about it. Well, the reason why is because y'all are still fishing the same stuff. You're fishing off your dock or you're fishing brush piles. Okay, I want you to think of this for just a second. This is going to make 1,000,000% sense to you. Where do all of the big bass tournaments get won on Grand Lake? Those docks and those brush piles. And those crappie are not going to be up in there where those giant largemouth are. So now these crappie are out in open water. And that's why these guys are not, that's why y'all didn't catch them for years. Well, now with our technology that we have to be able to find them, guess what? There's more crappie in Grand Lake than He says that any other lake in the state of Oklahoma right now, there's out in open water. And y'all are not fishing for them out there. You're fishing the docks and you're fishing the brush piles. And they're not there. These fish are out in open water. I wish Dustin was here, and I don't know if he will be or not, but there's a new guy on Grand Lake, great guy, Dustin McDaniel, and he's catching limits here with clients, and they're fishing out in open water, and he may be fishing 10 foot deep in 80 foot of water. Okay, they're up in the water column, but they're out relating to these creek channels. And by creek channel, I don't mean Wolf Creek or Duck Creek. I'm talking about the Grand River that was here before the lake was impounded. Out in the middle of this lake, out on the actual creek channel, is where these fish are living.
I noticed today we went, and I went over, I don't know what bridge it is, but we went over a bridge, and I noticed on the far right-hand side, I seen just acres of comrades and pelicans. They're out there eating shad. More than likely, those crappie are going to be in that area in the same place. They're picking off those shad as those comrades are. If I was going to go drop a boat in right now, that would be the place I would go check first off. I would throw my jigs out, and typically what I do is I go through the area and then I'll see my units. And from a 2D unit to a side scan unit to a down scan to a live scope, I would go out there and see how deep those fish are. And then I would set up my jig weights to go by that. I've actually got a chart that I did with In-Fisherman about 3 years ago that you should still even be able to find that says exactly what size to use at exactly what speed to get your jigs at certain heights. So if you really want to take advantage of that, look at In-Fisherman. Like I said, I did a magazine article where I gave them everything I knew that's out there for you guys. And it's also been on a video I did at Grizzly Jig. We've actually put it on the screen there as well. Another thing that Todd and I is doing right now, have y'all heard of the Crappie Connection? I see one yes. Anybody else heard of the Crappie Connection? Two? We want everybody to know about the Crappie Connection. Here's another one. What we are is a podcast, YouTube channel, what have you. All we talk about is crappie fishing. It's a connection from the manufacturers to the tournament anglers, to the weekend anglers, to the novice, to anybody around. We are all connected from crappie fishing. We wanted to start this to educate you guys on how to become better crappie fishermen, to understand the biology. And like Todd hit on, we had Josh Johnson on there, which he's a terrific, y'all are very fortunate to have this man as a biologist in your area. He is a wealth of knowledge on crappie behavior, and he went through there and described what temperature the crappie spawn, how to hold a crappie when you want to take a picture and release him without killing him. He went through all these different facts about crappie fishing on 2 different episodes that we had. Then we've even had like Bobby Garland Bates a couple of years ago on how they come up with colors for jigs, the science behind it. There's science behind even making poles. Mm-hmm. We went through how guys win tournaments, how they break down new bodies of water, and that's one we released this past week is how do you go to a new lake and find fish? It's a question everybody thinks of when they go to a new lake. And you might say, well, I want to go to Eufaula. I've never been there, but where do I start? We went through and talked about very detailed information on how you find fish in a new body of water. We filmed on, as well, that'll come out probably this week. If you're getting ready to go on a guide trip, what questions do you need to ask a guide? Todd receives these same questions as I do every day as far as what do I need to bring to go on a guide trip? Where do I need to stay? You know, all these different things as crappie fishermen that you're asking yourself, hopefully we're answering for you guys.
So out of everybody sitting here, we would love to hear from y'all, and for everybody there to say, okay, I want to hear more about this. It could be how to fish a slip cork off of the bank, or how to fish below a dam where they're running a lot of water in current. Anything that you want to hear about in the crappie world, get a hold of us, let us know. Because I will admit my weaknesses, so will he. But we will find the guy who is the expert at that, and Brad and I will interview him. And we're not easy on all these guys. Sometimes we'll scrutinize them. We will interview them and then put it in an episode on YouTube. And we'll make him answer your questions. In fact, I think what's really fun about what we're doing with Crappie Connection for me is sometimes tricking some of these guys into telling us stuff that they didn't want to tell us.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden they just like deer in the headlights. Who was it? Riddle?
Yeah.
He was getting all excited talking about how he won this tournament and was going on and on and on. And then all of a sudden he let a little something slip and he just kind of froze up and he was like,
man.
Oh, I shouldn't have said that. It's like, too
I didn't
late.
mean to let that one
It's
out.
on film now. But in anything that y'all want to know about, contact us. You can get a hold of me on Facebook or Brad on Facebook, or go to the Crappie Connection Facebook page. Give us some things that you want to hear about. You know, if you want to hear more about longliner or trolling crankbaits, we'll go out, we'll shoot a video of how to set up doing it.
We have both of those.
We'll show you. Do you?
Yep.
Cool. All right, guys. Hey, we're out of time. We will be down at the other end of this building. If y'all have got some ideas for some episodes, come tell us. Find us here. I've got all of my signature rods at the other end of the building. We've got the new little tiny beaver bottom bait. For those of y'all that don't know, we just introduced it 2 days ago at this show. It's on that stage, that far stage. But come down there and check us out. Thanks for your time. Thank you.
River here, I'll rest my soul.